Welcome, folks. This is House Corrections and Institutions Committee. It is Thursday, April 17th. We have with us today Laura Trishman, who is our Historic Preservation Officer, and we're going to continue a conversation we've started a little while ago on the Bennington Monument and the restoration rehab of how we go forward with this. We just needed some updates. I know one of our committee members gave a proposal of going for, thinking of possibly encasing the monument and putting some type of facade over that. I know, Sean, you've had a conversation with Laura on this as well.
Okay.
But we just needed some more updates in terms of how we're going to move forward. Also, just to remind the committee, we put in $525,000 in our capital bill to allow historic preservation to go forward with an RFP, to go out with an RFP to figure out how we're going to dry out the monument. That's really the next step that has to occur, and we have found money in the capital bill to do that. That is now over in the Senate, and I don't know where they are on this at all. But Laura, thank you. We want to bring you back, and Jamie's with us as well, to give us an update on where you are, and we can talk about Representative Sweeney's proposal. We can talk about where you're headed in. Just have a conversation. That's all yours. So if you could introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you very much. I'm Laura Trishman, the State Historic Preservation Officer, and I'm joined by Jamie Duggan, our Director of Preservation for the State Historic Sites. I hope will interrupt me every time I say something incorrect. First, I wanted to point out that our mission is historic preservation. We are trained, educated, it's drilled into us. That's the lane that we stay in, is historic preservation. And the state mission, the mission for the state historic sites is to evoke an authentic sense of time and place. Our motto is history where it happened. So we don't want to be changing anything so that there's misinterpretation or it's not authentic. That said, in my head, I can hear Chester Arthur State Historic Site is a reconstruction. The original site was lost and was reconstructed from historic photographs. We do not interpret it as his birthplace. We learned later that was not the birthplace we were reconstructing in the 50s. That it was a boyhood home for a short time, and we're actually working with the National Register of Historic Places to get it recognized as a commemorative location. We very strictly follow the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. That includes preserve, first and foremost, depending on what resource you have, rehabilitate, which is often what happens with buildings that are being altered for other uses, for additions, things like that. We do not want buildings to stay in time unless they are a museum. Restore, which is generally where our museums fall, and then reconstruct, which is for non-surviving resources. And under 22 VSA Chapter 14, which is the historic preservation rule for us, it says that we are to establish standards and criteria for the acquisition of historic properties and for the preservation, restoration, and maintenance of those resources. A little bit of background of the Bennington Monument itself, I think, is necessary, as you were saying, because we're kind of losing the forest for the trees, if you will. This was a key American victory of the American Revolution. It involved Green Mountain Boys, New Hampshire militia, volunteers from New Massachusetts. And really what calls to us when we see the monument are the people that were killed or wounded because of that. 277, and then there were 700 British captured. The battle did not take place in Bennington on Monument Circle. It was the result of the storehouse of militia, the warehouse that was there that they were trying to capture. So the monument itself, which was built in 1887 to 1891 when it opened, and it was in planning and fundraising for 50 years before that, is a memorial for those who fought there. It's a monument to our fight for American independence. And this is, although they didn't fight there, this is hallowed ground for those who died at the battle and in the war. It also was dedicated to celebrate Vermont's 100 years as the 14th state. And I also wanted to point out, since it's opened to today, on average, it has about 10,000 attendance at the dedication. But since then, we're bringing in close to 35,000 people a year, and that's only open from May to October. When it was originally constructed, it was open year-round, and that is our ultimate dream. Last year, we had a banner year of close to 40,000 visitors, bringing in $276,000 from just this site alone. This site supports other sites that do not make as much money. This is our #1 gift shop. And people are coming not just because of the battle. There's definitely interest in the American Revolution, particularly now that we're into the 250th semi-quincentennial. But people come because you can see Massachusetts, New Hampshire. You get great views of Vermont. Since it's construction, and most particularly since it's turning over to the state, there's a lack of cyclical, proactive maintenance. We do the best we can with the funding that we have, and we do have a great partnership with BGS, but I think this monument was a little more than any of us knew what to do with. We were reactive, not proactive in our maintenance and monitoring of what the monument was doing. And there were times where we had allocated funding that would be shifted over to something else, or we would end up losing it. Part of the monument was restored, not all of it. And those were best practices then, but they're proving not to be what the stone itself really would like. The moisture issue is primarily humidity. It is not just water, snow, or climate change. It is all of those things. So no matter what we do to it, humidity is always going to be a factor, and we have to figure out how to address that. 2022 and 2024 study was of issues and causes. The issue list kept growing. The causes list was pretty well defined once we identified the issues. From that, we got recommendations to dry out the monument, monitor the humidity and cracking. We now realize that we've got wind we need to address too. The bottom of the monument gets different type of wind, as we saw where the fencing was taken off in February, which is being put back next week. And then we need to do safety measures for the visitation. But I really want to stress that beyond the drawing out, the monitoring and the safety, we have no plan. We have no justification for the $40 million beyond the construction of the scaffolding. This is your.
Okay.
I also wanted to add, while we're changing seats, that the kettle that Representative Sweeney mentioned, we believe is a commemorative piece dating from when the monument was constructed. It was hanging in the monument and deteriorating. So we've had it at a conservator for about 1.5 years now. And when it comes back, it'll likely go to Hubbardton or Mount Independence while the monument's in construction. And then we figure out where to place it, but it will not be hung up again.
Jamie, welcome. If you could identify yourself for the record.
Thank you. Jamie Duggan, Director of Preservation for the record. So the enclosure idea has a number of goals. Obviously, the first is to set up a structure around the monument with an enclosure that will likely be some type of scrim
So what you're talking about is your proposal, when you're saying the enclosure, it's not what Representative Sweeney.
Correct.
Okay, just to be clear, so folks.
Yeah, essentially what, we're considering is,
And if I can interrupt again, this is what your RFP that we're providing, the 525,000 would go towards in terms of how do you dry out the monument? And
That's correct.
enclosure. Okay,
and the design of that would, involve scaffolding around the structure, which would create the framework for, the scrim. The scrim, we've looked at a couple of types already. There are some that can actually be printed on. And so, it's essentially, a piece of plastic or, some type of a screen sort of element. The top would be completely waterproof, sort of like a waterproof hat. And then the scrim on the side would prevent windblown rain from reaching the monument. It would also let a lot of natural circulation of the air around it. It's really important for us to get the monument dry so we can start mocking up and considering some of the repairs that would need to happen. Those repairs, by having the scaffolding in place, it will allow those repairs to be done right on the structure and then monitored over, a year or so to see how they respond. There are a number of components to the drying out. It's going to require some mechanical means, likely some dehumidifiers and a lot of fans for air movement. Similar to how we have, during the testing process, we have a number of monitors in place for humidity, crack monitors, tilt meters. We've purchased that equipment with the intent that that will stay in place in perpetuity, which will allow us to continue to monitor the monument over time, not just sort of as we're trying to address these issues. This would be a temporary enclosure. Temporary would still have some definition to be applied to it. We're unsure of how long exactly it would take to dry out the monument. That is something that would be developed as part of this RFP, some of the scope and standards for that. It would be a temporary measure, though, with the idea of repointing the monument fully on the exterior. And then at that point, the scrim could come down. It would be better if that enclosure stayed up a little longer while we completed the interior. Those are going to have to be two separate campaigns just because of access. And the reason why we're promoting an issue that's a bit more temporary is that once the monument is restored, it's going to be in a much different condition than it would be today. And we believe that we would be able to remove the building enclosure system. And with the mechanical means that were installed as part of the drying out process, that the monument would, it would be better able to respond to the weather and the infiltration that we're seeing now. The cracking of stone started appearing in the 1920s. The monument was records of it being wet as early as 1911 or damp on the inside. And I know that the quality of the stone has been talked about, but I think it is actually with these intense conditions, it's pretty remarkable that the stone has lasted to the effect that it does now. What we're seeing on the stone in particular is generally a flaking of pieces off of the stone. That's happening because of the saturation of moisture. The stone itself can breathe and, is porous. It can absorb moisture and release moisture in an ambient way. But when the cracking around the stones allows the water to infiltrate deeper into the structure and behind it, it's a much harder physical process for the stone to do it on its own. However, once repointed, once the cracks are, so the cracking, there would be could be potentially 4 different ways to address it. Could be injecting a small epoxy in there. There could be some plastic repairs that are put in. In some cases, there are some stones that have been repaired in the past with inappropriate means and they are, some of those are suffering worse. We will likely need to find a source of stone for infill repairs. That's another item that obviously would have to be done later on in the design process of the larger project. But we do have good faith in this, that it will be able to respond to these treatments and continue to have a decent service life. That is all predicated on the need for a proactive cyclical maintenance plan moving forward. And what that would allow for is that would, hopefully it would, the maintenance scheme would be set up, as part of the restoration project so that it could be monitored a lot more readily than it has in the past. We have Vertical Access, our industrial ropes team, who they'll be coming soon to do some removals for public safety. But while they're rappelling down the monument, they have the equipment on them, cameras and tablets, they snap pictures and they continue to take data so that we can see the changes year over year and over time. So having a cyclical maintenance plan in place, that would mean we would not be in the situation we are now, where we find ourselves needing this tremendous amount of money to keep the monument in good shape. It would require lesser amounts so long as that maintenance can be scheduled and completed on a timely schedule.
So what you're thinking is the next phase would be focusing in on drying it out, taking the moisture and the humidity. And what I'm kind of wondering, and I'm looking at Joe Asia in BGS about this, sounds very similar to the State House in terms of trying to get the moisture, the humidity out of our HVAC system. Drying the water out during the summer. This is what's going through my mind. If we have a system similar to what we have in the State House that we're going towards, would that be running constantly with our monument, even after it's dried out? To have a system in that you can pull the humidity out? Is that part of the thinking?
Yes, it is. And there was a system like that in place. We heated the monument for many, many decades. There was actually a furnace in the basement of the gift shop and a tunnel that goes under Monument Circle to the monument. And there are propane blower heaters, if you will, in the stairwell that it goes up. And I believe that started in the late 50s, early 60s, and it went through the 70s. And then with the energy crisis at the time, we stopped doing that. And we have not been doing anything to address that microclimate in there since.
But that's part of the thinking, that we would reinstitute something similar to that.
Yes, I think that a future system is going to rely more heavily on air movement and not necessarily heating. Like we would never, even in our buildings that we sort of mothball for the winter, we don't heat them for comfort. We heat them to protect the materials at a very low level so we don't have great fluctuations in temperature and humidity. I think that considering the structure and its features, that circulating the air and moving the air is going to help more than trying to heat that in any kind of way that will have an impact on the humidity in a large way.
So if you have a feel for what the expense would be to continue to heat this heat sink that's 300 and
Not yet. No, because I think that would be a system that would need to be designed. The infrastructure is not even there anymore, the furnace and whatnot.
But you've got the records from the one that was working that shut down because it became prohibitive.
We might have those somewhere, but I don't. Yes, they have those actually from those days.
Joe was there. We want the flood.
My point is, my point is that we need to understand what that ongoing cost is going
Absolutely.
to be, otherwise we're just.
And that is in the works. One of the 15 different firms that worked on our project is specifically looking at the hydrothermal movement of water in the mass, which is essentially understanding where the humidity is moving into the wall and how easy it is for it to get out. So that is something. And there is a clear sort of masonry issue going on here, but this building science involved with this 300-foot tall chimney is also a factor that I think plays heavily here. And so understanding, again, as Laura's saying, we're looking at the humidity and the moisture within inside, and I think understanding how airflow circulates inside of it and around it would be helpful as well. There's definitely different conditions at the top.
That's critical. We stopped maintaining it is probably the bigger reason why it's starting to fall apart, not climate change, but we stopped heating it.
I think that has a big.
Real combination of both.
Yeah.
Probably a combination of both. Laura?
I would like to also add that, as part of the design process, and that's post the design of and construction of the scaffolding and scrim, when we see how the stone is reacting and we figure out the design for the air moisture system that goes into it, we need to figure out what the alternatives would be. And that's where enclosing it in copper or any other material, taking it down halfway, taking it down entirely, that comes into play. That's where we start examining what are the true alternatives for this. Is it structurally sound enough to last another 100 years if we do this, this, and this? And how much is that going to cost us? So again, we've not gotten beyond the construction of the scaffolding and scrim to dry it out, to know a lot of the questions everyone's asking. And you're doing exactly what I did to the 15 team that we hired, because I kept saying, well, how much is that going to cost? Can we just do this part? And it's a very set process. And it's a very tight dance as well, that this is a nationally significant monument. It's recognized by the National Park Service for its national significance to the Revolutionary War. And if we start changing it, we could possibly jeopardize that designation, which would mean we would be giving up all federal dollars, all support from the National Park Service. It could affect our visitation and tourism. So we're trying to factor all that in as they were thinking about designing the scaffolding and the scrim. We were like, well, we want it to be open. While people are working on it, we want to be able to show that. We do not want our visitation to go down. We need that income as well. So these are all things that we're trying to figure out and make sure that we don't jeopardize anything going forward. But we truly do not know anything beyond the design of the scaffolding and scrim at this point.
Then you see how long it would really take to dry it out.
Right.
But also you get more of a handle during that time frame, which could be what we've heard is up to 3 years, what the humidity levels are. Because you could be drying it out and the stone is drying out, the limestone. But if the humidity is trapped inside, that's causing more damage possible.
Correct. So any enclosure, permanent or temporary, needs to take into account addressing the stone so that we're not exacerbating its deterioration, which we've done since I turned off the heat.
So going out for the RFP for the enclosure, for the drying out, the scaffolding, scrim. Are you also looking, would the RFP also be looking at how you could heat the monument and also draw out the humidity?
That's
Would that
part
be
of
part of it?
the design of the building enclosure system includes the plans for drying it out. Those are going to come together.
So if there was a system there of heating or pulling out the moisture from the air, the humidity, like what we're doing here in the State House, what would be installed? Would that be on a temporary level? Or would that be more permanent? Or is it too soon to tell? Because you're not gonna know how effective it's gonna be.
I think it's too soon to tell. However, I do think that what we would look to address that in a way now that again would help us moving forward. So I think we would charge the designers to come up with a system that would be left in place, but that also had again for this sort of interim period that had additional capacity to dry out, and then we would be left ideally with what we need moving forward after the project. We would purchase, I think, those items at the beginning. That's if this drying scheme can be integrated that way. There might be other ways to do it with, installing temporary dehumidifiers, for example, at different levels. That was one of the strategies that was talked about at first, which ended up with 12 industrial size dehumidifiers in the building for a period of time. And again, I think because it is a pretty robust structure, and it's stone on the inside and the outside. So I think the air movement is going to again be a real aid at having that happen efficiently and in a shorter amount of time, hopefully, than just relying on the mechanical means alone.
Questions, Connor?
Yeah, I think I'm losing track in just all the discussion where the $40 million number came from initially. It's like the sticker shock of that is driving so much of our thinking, and it puts us in this like sort of awful position where it's how much is preserving our history worth, right? Like, and that's a horrible place to be. And then we sort of snowball it, right? Well, if it's 40 million now, it's probably gonna be 60 by the time we do it. So I'm just trying to get a handle on that. And if we can get away from that number, maybe with some of these other options, it gives us more flexibility. Have a good think about this,
Yep.
Would you look at that too? Are you good?
So that $40 million at the moment is our sort of ceiling. And the numbers that we are presenting here would be drawn out of that. We also, as Laura mentioned, we had some consternation with that figure. And we pressed the design team to sharpen their pencil, as it were. I would say this is more order of magnitude pricing, and that is, again, why it's critical for us to get into that design process so that we can design the repairs, understand how much time each one will take, what kind of materials involved, and that will definitely inform budget in a much greater fashion than we are able to now. So short term, we're looking at a much more modest amount, if 10 million is a modest amount compared to the 40. That would bring us up through having that building enclosure erected and in place. And at that point, it would give us lots more time because at least in our mind, the monument would be protected at that point and can take the time it needs to dry out and shift into sort of a new building environment. And so that's overall, there is a need for more clarity in a lot of that. But some of that will not happen until we can understand the repairs.
Beyond the numbers you see on the screen, we don't know where the 40 million came from, except that, they're well-respected professional team of 15 that has been studying it for 2 years. And they said, we're looking at 40, but they never gave us the details beyond
Okay.
this designing and drying it out.
So we have a lot more questions. We have Brian, Joe, and Mary.
Okay,
We're going to defer to design, Mary.
it's the same sort of thrust, but the cyclical maintenance that you talked about, is that what's represented in the bottom line here? I was wondering what that looks like.
The bottom line are the steps that we've been taking most recently to make the monument safe and ready for the public. So that money, some of it went towards create the fence and the covered walkway. As mentioned, we have vertical access, the industrial ropes team, they're coming. We're having that done yearly. When they did that exercise the first time, removing the loose materials, I asked them, how long of a period can we get out of this? And of course, there were no guarantees, but they anticipated about 18 months. And we had no issues with materials last year at all. And when I was down there in January, we we're just starting to see some small flakes again. And it's been over that time period. So moving forward, we will have vertical access come at the beginning of every season to make sure that we're doing our due diligence and keeping all those hazards that might develop over the winter. And even in the short time that we've been addressing things now, that was a great improvement to come by in January and find very little on the ground as compared to past years when that would be much more significant and larger pieces too.
One exercise we need to do is how much we're spending now to maintain and for safety reasons so we can open versus how much it's going to cost to have that cyclical maintenance once it's done. So vertical access, we anticipate once it was restored, would be coming every year for say 5 years, and then maybe every 5 years or something as we're monitoring and maintaining it.
Okay, thanks.
Mary and then Joe.
Well, I just wanted to say I'm happy that, well, not happy, but happy that this discussion is being had, because I did ask at that meeting before, where did the 40 million come up with? Because that's all that almost anyone heard inside this room and outside was 40 million, and that just seemed unattainable. And so this gives a better, picture as to what going forward, no matter what is decided. But I'm thankful that we're having this discussion. As I said, I was thankful that Sean was trying to think out of the box, even though, like I said, that was a concern for me, because I know even in lighting, the monument was a monumental, fee in itself. So I do thank you for at least having a little bit of a different focus as to what the end line may be.
Joe and then Kevin. Whoops.
What involvement has the National Park Service had in the current phases? And are there any possible, financial assistance forthcoming?
Yes, the National Park Service has been very involved, one, because it's nationally significant, so we can rely on their expertise, and two, because right now we have congressionally directed spending of $500,000 that's going to help us through this drying out design phase, and with some archaeology. And they are involved then in reviewing everything we do, every contractor that gets hired. They're all in our business and providing us with great support.
So is there any consideration for future phases? Once you have something, for example, the enclosure, is there any possibility we're going to see?
We're going to continuously ask and pursue all of it.
Once you've done the scaffolding and scrimming for the enclosure and it starts to dry out, your thinking is then you can really evaluate more what's really happening. And that will give you information in terms of how we do move forward. That's kind of what I'm picking up here.
Right, and if the stone is just not drying out or something, or it's too deteriorated, or it's going to cost twice as much as the estimate, then we go to the extreme of other alternatives. Do we construct something over it and just let it go? Do we take it down?
It's a step-by-step process.
It
We got to
is.
figure out how we're going to dry it out and start that process to see really how it's going to play out. Kevin?
A little bit of engineering, I remember. I think we've got incredible modeling that based on the surface of the monument, the materials, the temperature, they can calculate pretty quickly how much it's going to cost to keep the environment the way we need it. I think that's one of the first things that needs to be done before we try to figure out how to do it, because once you put an enclosure over that monument, that's gonna actually inhibit getting the water out. You're better off with more surface area than less surface area if you're trying to drive moisture out. Now, I know you gotta keep the moisture out, but that's all an engineering model. I mean, that is, because if it comes up to be $500,000 just to maintain the temperature and the humidity per year, that becomes a real number that you can start figuring out, can we afford it? That's why we stopped heating it back in 1950, because they couldn't afford it. I want the monument. Don't misunderstand me, but that's simple engineering, I think, to model what it's going to cost to keep it dry.
And that's part of the schematic design and infrastructure design of what we're proposing moving forward. Phase 1B is addressing that.
Laura, when you spoke about archaeological work, is that just sort of like site testing, soil, like what is archaeological work that you mentioned?
So because it's a National Historic Landmark and because we're getting federal funding, we've got to make sure we do not adversely affect any potential archaeological sites in Monument Circle, which was the site of the warehouse for the Bennington battle. It also had a road going through it and a bunch of buildings. Some of them were municipal. So we need to better understand what's there. So we're going to do archaeology for the whole square, see if we can positively identify the location of the warehouse and mark that. And also, most of the ground seems to be bedrock, so we need to figure out how to construct the scaffolding for that.
Yep, thanks.
Connor?
Do we have that $500,000 from the feds now? And the question we ask everybody who comes in, how confident are we it's coming if we don't have it?
I'm pretty confident that the grant is being worked on by the Park Service right now.
Okay.
It was last year's award.
Okay.
This still doesn't mean much.
So I want to predicate that I had a really lovely conversation with Laura and Jamie last night. I had made some assumptions that were, by just my idea, it kind of does mess up the historical significance
You
of the
think the
place.
copper messes up a little?
Some details. But I do want to, I think one of the things I took away, and I know that they care a lot about this, as I do as well. But I think I'm going to go back to the thing that kind of drove me in the first place to kind of try to figure this out. And I know you don't probably have the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. When you add this up, it's around 13 million high end estimate just to figure out what we need to do.
Mhm.
When do you think you're going to have that money so that we can make that decision? Because right now we're talking of, anyway, let me just leave it at that. When do you think you could have that 7, 8, 9, 10, 13 million that we're going to need? When is that? What's a time frame to obtaining that amount of money?
Yeah, I think we're just starting to explore other funding opportunities. We never considered that this would all be handled within the capital bill by any stretch of the imagination. We had to understand the situation before we can go out and start soliciting some help on that line. So we haven't really had an opportunity yet. I think this coming season is going to be key for that, trying to line up potential opportunities and partners. There's definitely some legwork we will need to do to get to that point.
You're gonna go out, you have 525,000 right now in the capital bill. That will go out for the RFP for phase 1A, steps 1 through 3. That's what that money in the capital bill that we found is to go towards. So the thinking, at least in my brain, how this works in the construction world, the thinking is that by January of next year, You will have the RFPs back. You will know what's entailed. There'll be some project costs in terms of what, if you do the scaffolding in the scrim, what that cost would be, and you're anticipating now it's between 5 and 10 million. That's what you're anticipating, but the RFP will zone in to a more definite amount. Then the process is how long would it take to put up the scaffolding and the scrim? Is that a full year to do that? How much does that cost? And that's where it plays into how much can the capital bill absorb? Is it 1 or 2 million? Or 3? And is there other sources? I mean, that's what's in my brain in terms of what the process is.
I think that's very accurate.
Okay.
I was thinking, like, when just thinking about the numbers earlier, now I know that your annual revenue goes to other things. You know, the 107, what it,
200 and
270,
279.
yeah, 279. So that goes to other things. So, but just for edification, if every single penny of that went to the 40 million, that's 150 years to pay back. And I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just like putting numbers into reality, or even to 15 million. I'm not going to do the math right here, and I didn't prepare myself, but that is a really long payback. So at that point, it can't be about money. It has to be about values, right? So if we're moving forward, this has to be a Vermont values thing, not money, because there's no way you can look at this in my mind and go, it's worth the money unless it's because of your values, you know, so our values.
Well, and that's why I'm suggesting the first question we need to ask is what's it gonna cost to maintain it? Because if it's $1 million a year or $5 million a year to heat it, then you can start
Okay, it wouldn't
making
be
some
that
value
much.
judgments pretty quickly.
I would think so, yes.
It's not gonna be that much.
Yeah.
Right, then one of the alternatives could, I mean, there's many that we could think of, but we don't open it, we just maintain it for as long as we can as we start to figure out how to take it down and commemorate in a different way.
Yeah, but you gotta do phase 1A.
Yeah.
To really figure out, and
Absolutely.
that's gonna take a process of what we've heard, up to 3 years
Mhm.
to really know what's going.
Which, and I'm sure that everybody already knows, you guys are probably planning for this. There is no way once scaffolding goes up that your numbers of visitors stays that high. Right? I mean, especially when it's wrapped. People are coming to see this beautiful monument. So for a few years, you're gonna have a dip. With unless some weird thing happens, you're gonna have a dip. And then hopefully after it's done, we market it right, there'll be an increase. Be like, look at our beautiful thing. But there will be a low. Like there's no way somebody if I want to go see the Battle or whatever it is, be Lincoln's, you know, and it's all wrapped up, it always has a decline. So
Yeah, and our goal is to keep the observation deck open and have the scrim be something you could see through, so you still have visibility. Jamie's been playing around with the idea of having cameras up there so that you can still see if you're in the visitor center. I think we would also pivot into a lot more events than we normally do. Now we've just let the monument kind of speak for itself.
Mhm.
But we would pivot, which would be something that we would continue to do after it's restored as well.
glad to hear you thinking about this. Thank you.
I think a good example of that, though, is the Washington Monument, which was covered for a number of years, 2 campaigns. And the second one, they put an RFP out to have the scaffolding be designed, it was designed by a famous architect, but it was meant to be more of an artistic installation and for the period that it was up.
Yeah.
So that, but, you know, I think there'll still be the ability for the public to, even if once it's within the enclosure, there still will be the ability to appreciate it. I think you would have to be obviously within that a little bit, but that's something that we can certainly prepare for.
Yeah.
So that there's the experience is not completely cut off.
Questions? Sean?
So, and I'm just gonna play the broken record. I keep going back to the money, and that's where it's in my little time here. It just seems like you are, I totally appreciate where you're coming from to save this thing. And I hope in my heart of hearts that that money could be found. But there's this reality part of my brain that's saying that at some point, and I think that, where Laura's going with this is that we may have to have that hard conversation. But I don't, there's also that whole thing of kicking the can down the road and coming up with this 10 or 12 or $13 million to find out where we are. It's just still a tremendous amount of money. And that's what I struggle with. As much as I want to save this thing, there's that reality. And I know that maybe we have all the time in the world. We could wait another 20 years. But I don't know. I want to just say that just a minute so I can sleep tonight.
Used to it.
Yeah.
This isn't throwing me so much for a loop.
Right.
Because I understand the process. You have to expend some money here on the RFP. Next January, we're going to have a lot more information. And then we'll be studying this, we'll be looking at this and say, the RFP could come back, it's 2 to 6 million, or it could be 10 to 20 million. We don't know that. We need to go out with this RFP so we have more information come January, and we will be discussing this again and figuring out what that next step for drawing the monument. But you got to get the RFP out there to figure out what the cost is going to be going forward. And next January, we're going to be discussing this. So I'm in a yank, but I'm not in a big yank because I've been around this a while. And all your numbers are going to change as you start to get into more realistic design documents.
You're also looking at actual factual data versus speculation.
That's exactly right. That's really important. And the motions you're going through, we've been going through for a long time and trying to figure this out, but getting the actual data.
You got to get
will
the
tell
data.
us what path we need to take going forward. And we're not going to construct scaffolding and then be like, okay, now we need to raise another $30 million.
You're not even going to go forward with the scaffolding because you don't have the money.
Right. Yeah.
That will be discussions next session.
Right. Each step is tied to the step in front of it and behind it.
Brian, did you have any?
It was close enough to what you just said, never mind.
I mean, that's the process of this committee in construction projects and the capital bill. The longer you're on this committee, you're going to see how how a project carries out over a number of years. And it changes. It changes as it goes along. That's part of how it operates. And the money you can put together different packages, or you look at the time frame of when you need the money for the fiscal years. Like this committee has heard me say a lot of times, how much are you anticipating getting out the door this fiscal year? You got 3 million here. You getting that 3 million out the door in this fiscal year, or is it going into the next fiscal year? That's what that's the crux in this particular project.
And we also need to get out there and educate people on what we're doing, what we're learning. We want to hear what Vermonters want. And we need to address the fundraising opportunities, and it's going to be a whole toolbox. Everybody in the pool figuring out how we would do the funding for this. But the governor is stressing no new taxes, no new fees.
Right.
So
Right. So you got to work in that
we
box.
will likely establish a 501c3 like State Parks has for their facilities that would be geared to just the monument initially, and then go to help us with all the historic sites.
One last positive thing I want to make. Jamie did say something to me yesterday in our meeting, and I think it's worth sharing, and it's hopeful because we don't know yet. We don't have the data.
Okay.
But if the stones were able to be mortared correctly after they got it dried out, there's a good chance with the right system inside of it, heating it, cooling it, dehumidifying it, they could leave the limestone, and the limestone could possibly, if we handle it correctly, could come back to life and it could stay there for another 200 years. We just need to get that data, which we don't have yet. So all hope is not lost. And I just think that was something pivotal that he said to me last night that I think is something positive to think about.
And that's what
I'm
we
glad to
work
see you
with
get your hope
next
back.
year. That's what we end up working with.
Mhm.
Huh?
Well, just piggybacking off Laura there, looking at creative funding solutions. I've actually been talking to some corporate sponsors. What have I told you?
Oh, no.
We don't have to pay a dime for this, as long as we agree to one alteration.
I thought you were gonna do that.
You know,
I thought I was gonna see Corey Scott with that.
28-story Big Mac will be offered there.
French fries.
Tourism would be up all-time high.
It gives us the opportunity to do some fun things like that.
All right, we'll get the cafeteria first.
Not,
God.
Like idiocracy.
Unless they pay annually.
Yeah, right.
You have to go see the Washington Monument.
We might have to
Get a beer
cut
there.
Right.
Yes, they do, they sell beers.
That's, yeah.
Thing.
It's Vermont, so.
Do you have another slide?
you can open another
That was just
tavern
that-
down the hill from the monument.
Well, I think this is, go ahead.
When will do we have any idea when we'll know whether we actually have the federal money or not? Because we're pretty sure we're gonna know whether the Senate's gonna, but 575,000 sooner than later. Do we have any idea on the federal money?
We should know in the next few weeks.
So by June.
Yeah.
We know whether we're able to move forward or we don't have any capital to move forward.
Yes, their money has to be obligated by then.
Good.
So is their money gonna go at all towards the RFP
Yes,
in conjunction with our $500,000? And how much would be the RFP total? Is it gonna be around $1 million, you think, for the RFP?
no, their half can't go to any of the design work. Theirs is going to go to vertical access, some dehumidifier testing, the archaeology, monitors.
So it's not gonna go for any design work. So how much are we getting from the feds again? About $500,000?
It's $500,000.
Will that go to pay for part of that RFP or not? It's gonna go after we get the RFP and do the work, start doing the work.
It'll be different work. Yeah, so it won't go to the design study.
Okay. So the RFP, the total cost of the RFP is about the 500,000 that
Yes.
we've put in. And the federal $500,000 is when you actually start doing the work of scaffolding, the scrim, and then the drying out mechanisms.
No, their funding will go to archaeology, the monitors, purchasing more monitors, addressing the wind monitoring, the vertical access, removing materials from the exterior.
Our contract, our larger contract is coming to a close, and so we don't necessarily have that full team in place anymore. We've picked the vendors that we need to work with for the next couple of years and have now some individual contracts with them. And that is what a lot of the CDS funding will cover. As Laura said, the archaeology, vertical access, things that are dealing with site preparation.
So those contracts will be in place by June?
Yes. They're
Yes, yeah.
Because you just said the federal, the $500,000 federal has to be obligated by June 1st.
They'll be ready once that federal money arrives, then we sign.
Be obligated, but it won't be encumbered.
getting on to receive it.
July will be a very important month for the Bennington Monument.
Yes.
Anything else? monument here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Very much. Appreciate your time, opportunity.
Yeah. So let's go off of you two. Let's take a quick 5-minute break.